Hi everyone, welcome to Just Crunch It. I'm your host Vikram, and we launched this podcast for everyone who cares about data. This podcast is for you if you are starting up or rethinking how things will evolve with all the latest advancements in technology. This is for you if you use data in your day to day, or for that matter, if you are just getting started with a career in data and data science. Well, we touch upon nuances, areas where data is overanalyzed, or for that matter, underanalyzed, glorified mistakes, perspectives, future, and AI, amongst other things. The goal is to ask some very hard and honest questions to ourselves about data, business, and everything in between to develop a sense of not being left out because of all the things that are moving in the world. Today, with us, we have James Colgan. James has led product and product management charters at companies like Slack, a growth charter at Microsoft Outlook Enterprise.
And was the chief product officer at Spendesk.
With over 2 decades of experience, and he's literally seen all of it. He has an extensive experience playing with product and strategy. James today advises founders and is also a board member for startups like Coho and Lepaya. Welcome to the show, James. How are you doing today?
Doing great, Vikram. Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
No, that pleasure is mine. James, I want to start with something I am personally very curious about. You have seen it all. Like I was going through your work experience, and it dates all the way back to the internet boom era. And then today we are in the age of generative AI. I can't think of someone I have talked to who's very much seen pretty much the extent of technological developments, such as yourself. How has your work experience shaped as you have moved through your career? As in, what was your perspective back then? How have things evolved? How have you kept yourself relevant uh, throughout the time? What is the secret sauce?
Oh, I don't know about secret sauce, but yeah, things have changed tremendously, I would say, over the last 15, 20 years. Um, and the role of data, to the point that you're asking, the broader point around data, has changed. I think the only thing that hasn't changed is the matter of change itself. One
Yeah.
thing that I love about the industry that we're in, we're constantly learning. We're learning how to build products. We're learning about the people that need products. We're looking at different opportunities. For example, back in the day, you're either going after consumer or you're going to after enterprise. Going after SMB was really, really hard and very, very costly. But because of distribution channels that have opened up with the internet, with social media networks to reach out to to different companies and different individuals, scale has become tremendously different over the last 15, 20 years. And the application of data in enabling that scale, or using data to enable functionality, that has changed tremendously. So I wouldn't say that the only secret sauce, if there was a secret sauce, is keep on learning, keep
Mhm.
on adapting, because the only thing that will remain unchanged is the fact that things will change.
Wow. So, uh, we, I can't think of like a better sort of caveat to ask this question that has been at the back of my head for a while. We are in 2024 now, and for a good part of last year, for the whole of the last year, and a good part of like the last 2 months in 2022 as well, after ChatGPT launched, there has been like a swarm of products, ideas, thesis that has been coming, thin wrappers of all sorts popping up, people who are trying very aspirational stuff. Now, to a large extent, I have seen very established folks also often talk about them having never seen a pace of change as fast as this. For example, maybe when the internet browsers came up, you were seeing people adopt it very fast. But with AI, everything suddenly seems very irrelevant. And
Mm.
when I reflect back on your last 2 decades, I can think of like numerous examples where you may have felt the same at that point in time. For example, the introduction of cloud, the introduction of AI in its original form, the whole digitization movement that we went through, and whatnot. But of course, as is the nature with us as human beings, it looks like what we are going through now is maybe much bigger of a problem than we have faced ever in the past. And I'm sure generations after us would probably also say the same thing, looking back at what we are seeing and laughing about it. But if AI is the big deal these days, how has your interaction been with AI? And more importantly, my ask here is, how are you thinking about it, given that you have seen so many things change and then it all again suddenly starts making sense? How should people who are panicking about AI, who are just feeling that, oh my God, there's no future, or everything is just like not having a base, what is your advice to them?
Yeah, so just to go back to something that you touched on, and the rate of change, right? So if we think about it, back in 1994, we had the Mozilla browser came out.
Yeah,
Then there was the e-commerce boom at the end of the 90s, where supply chains and distribution channels and distribution models, especially in retail, were getting upended. Then we had the rise of the social network and how that was going to be a way to engage with customers and users. Then there was the Web 2.0, and that was a massive amount of change. And cloud computing, that was pretty much happening at the same time. And so, how you're actually building out for scale. Then we have the mobile revolution, and that just unlocked a tremendous amount of potential. And now here we are with the next paradigm shift with artificial intelligence, and in particular generative AI. So each of those periods or epochs, you could say, they all had the hype cycle, right? There was the discovery or the introduction of a new technology, a new
yeah,
paradigm, a new way of thinking, and everyone thought that it was going to solve all problems and everything would be up and to the right in a very steep curve. And then the realities of the situation, the realities of the technology, some of the constraints or limitations around some of these technologies starting to be understood, and what people aspired to accomplish with a new technology, those aspirations weren't met. Product truth wasn't actually met, and you hit into this trough of despair, as it's talked about. And then you have a shedding of companies, right? Companies that were not real companies, they were features, or maybe they were a product, but they couldn't actually get revenue, and so they couldn't evolve and develop into companies. So the market in general would shed these companies, and that's the creative destructive aspect of Silicon Valley in particular, but technology writ large. But those companies that had the staying power, that really understood the problem that they were fixing or the opportunity that they were addressing, they were able to secure funding, they were able to get to revenue, they were able to do that efficiently and effectively. And then they would come out of that trough of despair stronger, fitter, healthier as companies, healthier as products. And then you would hit this, I think it's called the plateau of productivity, I think it's called. So you had this hype cycle, and every single one of those technology epochs went through that hype cycle. With generative AI, we're seeing exactly the same thing, but it's compressed. It's not happening over years. It's happening kind of over quarters almost. And so you do see, back in the day, in the early 2023, as you were saying, people were skinning or wrapping ChatGPT, etc. And they were delivering out a very bespoke experience of generative AI for a particular persona. But the reality is that they were missing, and still are missing, a lot of what would be considered competitive differentiation, or moats that they can have where they can defend themselves from either incumbents coming in or new entrants into the marketplace, because they really didn't have any intellectual property per se, or they don't actually have their own data that they're leveraging. They're leveraging somebody else's data. And so you're seeing this happen now, where things that look neat, things that looked interesting, are really understood to not be a core product or something that can scale into a company, but they're actually more of a feature of something broader. So a Chrome plugin, for example, really is an extension of the Chrome product, right? It is a feature that Google or another browser, Microsoft Edge, etc., can absorb that in the blink of an eye. Or ChatGPT, OpenAI can actually absorb that functionality in their own good time once they understand that traction is being developed there. Because again, that feature, that company that really is a feature rather than a product, doesn't have that differentiation, doesn't have that moat, doesn't have the scale that the underlying OpenAI ChatGPT does from a data perspective or a distribution perspective, such as they are part of Chrome, they're part of Edge, they're part of Safari, etc. So first of all, we need to take it back to basics, right? And this is the one thing I think that doesn't actually change. It is, what is the problem that you're solving and who are you solving it for, right? Is it a high pain point, and it is a pain point that is experienced frequently, because you've got to have both of those things at the same time. It is something that I really want to do differently for whatever reasons, whether it's a company doing something differently or whether it's a user, a consumer doing something differently. And I want to be able to do that on a regular and frequent basis. If you don't have high pain and frequency together, then you're not really going to gather the momentum that you need to build value and build a product and build a company. So that doesn't change. And so, as folks that are building products and building companies are looking at what they should be doing and how they should be looking at artificial intelligence, before you actually reach for the tool, before you reach for artificial intelligence or anything else, you really should be looking at the opportunity, looking at your consumer, looking at your customers and your users, and truly understand their context and have a solid understanding of their problem that you're addressing and fixing. And then seeing if data, then seeing if artificial intelligence is actually the right thing to apply, because we're seeing this, and as I talked to lots of different companies where they started out going for generative AI or going after artificial intelligence writ large, and really what it comes down to is it's just, we just need a machine learning algorithm, and that needs to be wrapped around an awesome user experience. And
Yeah.
there's not really a chat interface; it's really something else. A problem is being solved in a different way through the UX, and that is enough to solve the problem, to build the product, to generate revenue, and to then build a company. So I think that's what my advice that I would provide is: go back to basics and understand your user, understand the problem, understand the market that you're going after. And if you've got these foundations in place, then start looking to solutions. Don't go to the solution first, go to the problem first.
Yeah, I think first principles thinking. I was just reading the other day that I think it was Sahil from Gumroad, the founder of Gumroad. He mentioned that first principle thinking often looks like a very trivial thing in the
Mm.
short run, but in the long run, if you just stick to that basic, and you may feel like you are dumb in the period you are practicing it, but in the long run, that's like the only relatively more foolproof way of ensuring that you are not building something that is irrelevant. And I think as human beings, we are very harsh on ourselves, as in like we end up looking at all of these developments and it's very easy for us to question that there's no relevance of whatever we were doing, or suddenly everything that we knew to be true is no longer true. And what I'm referring to essentially is the panic that a lot of people have been feeling internally. But James, I have to ask you this. So you mentioned an example of a browser and an extension, right? Like now it's very obvious now gradually that companies that are doing maybe one particular feature, and it's established that LLM can't be a differentiator. It's maybe a feature, and everyone is expected to have that sort of a feature, pretty much the way you expect a login button on a product. People expect AI now to be available in there. And with AI models becoming so powerful, everything is becoming more and more cheap. There is more expectation for every dollar of expense. But what I'm coming to is that if I'm trying to, let's say, build a voice intelligence platform, or I'm trying to, let's say, just do a simpler voice editing thingy on my using AI, it maybe made sense at some point in time, but today, as the models are becoming stronger, and if I think of the use cases where someone is maybe using a voice recording platform, or for that matter a voice generation platform, they are likely going to use it in a video. So it makes sense, or it may not be a bad idea to think about a future where likely every video production tool or platform would end up supporting it in house. And what I'm essentially coming to is that this is relatively easier to predict because it makes sense, we are familiar with it. But if I reflect back on the last 5 6 years as well, for example, back during my days at Sprinkler, sentiment analysis was a
Mm.
very big thing. And sentiment analysis used to be like a key pitch that we used to make to a lot of folks out there. It used to be one of the most loved features. Essentially, we were crunching through a lot of social data and figuring out who is talking positively about you on, let's say, a review platform like Yelp or something. And suddenly, with generative AI, today, all of those companies that may have hit a certain milestone are now no longer a big deal. Now they see suddenly their valuations plummet because everyone can do sentiment analysis just sitting on their laptops in like a relatively very quicker time frame. And what I'm trying to ask essentially is, how should someone go about applying the first principles thinking, or like applying the thing that you talked about, that hey, stick to whether it's actually a pain point in a scenario where technology is evolving so fast. For example, could we have foreseen that sentiment analysis would become irrelevant? Yes, we could have, but most of us would not have as well. And I ask this to you only because I think you have gone through this cycle so many times in your career. But yeah, what are your thoughts there?
I guess there are two things that come to mind from a first principle perspective. And I touched on one of them previous, but it's maybe worth going back to, is that you need two components, right? You need the product itself,
Hmm.
but then you also need distribution.
Yeah,
And as product people, as entrepreneurs, as technologists, we can often get enamored and fall in love with the product itself, but then not put enough effort or focus or investment on what it means to get distribution.
yeah,
We need to have both of those, and there's definitely a clear example of that. Um, Most recently, especially related to my background, is so I came out of Microsoft and then went into Slack, and there we have two competing products. We've got Slack, the messaging platform and productivity platform or collaboration platform, and then you've got Teams, which
yeah.
is a video conferencing collaboration platform as well, looking like they are going after the same market, but with very different emphasis on different aspects of the product. But the key difference between the two was not necessarily the product, although those differences were stark. It was actually the distribution mechanisms. And so
Hmm.
Microsoft, with strong relationships, strong sales motions, going after the enterprise market, leveraged that distribution model that Slack was still building at the time, getting into the enterprise and building out that distribution model. So that's the first thing to look at is, okay, it's not just the product, but it's also distribution. First principles thinking about what you're building as you're thinking about your company. The second thing is really what it comes down to, and how the intersection between the product itself and the customer and the user and the consumer. And there we really need to think about the moats or the differentiation. And there are essentially three different layers that we need to be thinking about. The
Hmm.
first one is the data layer, if you will. That I think is self-evident. If you're
Hmm.
relying on or you're dependent upon somebody else's source of data, then inherently you're going to have a strategic weakness or a vulnerability that you need to shore up over time. The next level is really the intelligence layer. So obviously there's data, and then there's building that intelligence layer, and that is where artificial intelligence can come in, whether it is chat related or whether it is video related, etc. Right? But there's got to be some sort of a secret sauce there. There's some sort of intelligence, some sort of differentiation, intellectual property that differentiates you in a sustainable way. And then last but not least, there is the engagement layer, the experience layer. And that is how are you emotionally engaging and connecting with your user? Because at all three levels, what you're really leveraging there, or what you're really trying to build in, is increasing, it may be a dirty phrase, but lock in or increase the real or perceived switching costs of your user. So you're attracting customers in. Once you've got them onto your platform, you're delivering value that you're monetizing, and you want to be ensuring that you're solving a problem at a high level of frequency, like we were talking about before, in a differentiated and delighting way, so that somebody doesn't want to move off of your platform and go to a competing platform. So again, the two first principles things I would think of is product distribution. Then think about your strategic, long-term, sustainable differentiation at three different layers: the data layer, the intelligence layer, and the experience or the engagement layer. And you don't have to have all of them, although the product and distribution, I would argue you do. But all three, you don't need to have all of them, but you need to ensure that you'll get to all of them eventually. Does
Yeah.
that make sense? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I wonder what really changes if you are a startup trying to do this as opposed to if you are someone like Microsoft trying to do this. And for example, you have advised startups, right? Like, and you have worked in enterprises both. Would you say that there is a difference in the thinking or the DNA as such in terms of how our organizations, for example, going after distribution, or for that matter to our broader topic of data itself, how what exactly is the difference between how a startup is approaching data and how is an established company approaching data?
Yeah. If as I really think through it, the only difference that I think between the two, and it's not 100%, is just speed.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to. So obviously, you've got incumbents like Microsoft, like Meta, like Google, etc., that have that established distribution, brand, etc. That is hard to beat, and that's why they're successful, and that's why they are such valuable companies. But the biggest advantage that a startup has over these large organizations is speed. How quickly can you get something into the market and then iterate from that? The other thing that I think is an interesting differentiation, now I think about it, is the size, the initial size of the opportunity.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is, in an enterprise, as an entrepreneur, as somebody that's inside of a company that is have an entrepreneurial nature, and they see an opportunity, and they say, okay, if I look at all of the assets that this large company has, whether it's data, products, engineers, technology, brand, etc., if I take these assets and direct them at this particular problem, there is a market potential of millions of dollars. But
Hmm.
if you're talking about a company that has billions of dollars in revenue,
Yeah.
with a market cap that can be upwards of $1 trillion, then those executives looking across their product portfolio can look at that opportunity that you've discovered as an entrepreneur and say that really isn't valuable. The opportunity cost relative to this other work that we can do is just too high. And so even if that avenue of exploration of that market can lead ultimately to a multi-billion-dollar business over time,
Yeah.
the decision-making process that these large enterprises often go through would eliminate that as an optionality, or as an option for building out a product or a product line. As a startup, you don't need, as long as you're going after a large enough TAM, total available market, you ultimately need to have a large TAM to build a company to build into for investors to be interested.
Yeah.
But you can go at that market in a very targeted, very narrow bore way, learning as you go, again, coming back to speed, getting something into the market, learning from your users, iterating really quickly, understanding the problem that you're solving, and building iteratively again the solution to solve that problem, understanding distribution mechanisms, understanding business models, understanding price point.
Yeah.
You can do all of that with a very little amount of funding, knowing that over the long term, 3, 5, 7, 10 years, you can build a multi-billion-dollar business. And so that's another advantage that a startup as a founder, as an entrepreneur, as opposed to an entrepreneur, has over the larger enterprises.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. And in fact, I was just discussing this with a friend the other day. Foundational models, right? Like we were talking about LLMs a while back. They have at least shown us that it's now possible to be a team of five people and do something which was probably earlier possible with like a team of 100 or 200 only.
Yeah.
And of course, you will see new models come in, and the ones that were early on have their own advantage because there would be marketplaces and so on that pop up around it. But there is only so much that needs to be fixed or that needs to be covered. Now, if you are, for example, a customer care company, or if you are, for example, a song editing company, or for that matter, just a text editing company, you don't need like the best of the best models. Of course, it's a good idea to use the strongest models, but something which has crossed, let's say, a 95% threshold or something like that is still good enough for you. It does not matter if you are incrementally using the best available model at any point in time, which means that all of these new age models that are coming up, that are even giving OpenAI and companies like that a fight, would essentially spin off a completely new set of products which would be as powerful, or you have a fighting chance. Like, for sure, the incumbent may have like an advantage in terms of an already established distribution network, the set of reputation that they have built. Those are like very tough to replace. But
Hmm.
then there are like these technological shifts wherein you can do what they were able to do in like 5 years within a span of a month. So I think it all again ends up coming to the same point of the ability to move fast because we are in today's era. But I want to circle back, James, a little bit on that pace aspect that you talk about. So if a startup is moving very fast and you have worked at enterprises as well, data, because we are talking about data, there is a whole idea of leadership sometimes being about gut calls. And what I mean by gut calls is that you know the data is saying something else, but you know from experience that it is not what's worth looking into. And sometimes it backfires as well. So
Hmm.
when products take unconventional route, and for maybe a startup that is too early, it's okay to just go by the flow and be like, hey, we don't need to focus on this at some point in time. Later in the future, we'll think about it. What is that right point where companies should start thinking about data, and how should they even structure it? Because you have worked in growth roles. I can't think of positions which are more of an interplay of data. Maybe you're working with like folks who are generating data from the sales front, you are looking at product users data, you're looking at like cross warehouse analysis. What is the right time to start so that it's not too late, first of all? And then at the same time, when should you be wary of using data? Like, when does data fail? Are there instances where, for example, in your life where data lied, or there's like a dirty stuff that no one talks about when it comes to data, for example?
So you, as a company, as an entrepreneur, as a startup, you need to be thinking about data pretty much almost immediately. Um, if you're whether it is leveraging that data to build some sort of functionality that are going to engage users, so you've got your differentiation through that data, and or you are looking at how you're onboarding your users and building out a growth engine to expand your user base once you've understood the problem that you're fixing, and you've got a solution that is valuable and compelling. The first part you want to be doing immediately. The second part is you can wait a little bit of time. I'll give you a very specific example. When I joined the Outlook mobile team, for example, there we didn't have the app instrumented at all. We had data in the form of the number of downloads. We had access into monthly active users, but that was basically it. People's activity or engagement within the app itself, we were completely flying blind. And so, but we needed to make some decisions, strategic decisions about how we should be developing the product itself. And so, in the absence of data, what we thought was, okay, so it's ostensibly an email application. There's calendar there as well, of course. But one of the challenges on a mobile handset, a cell phone, is how you're actually going to be composing an email. So let's think about how we can make it easier for people to write emails. And in the meantime, let's instrument the product itself so we can start getting the data to understand exactly how people are using the product. Even so, a modicum of data would have helped us pointing in the right direction. So we went down this composition route.
Yeah.
In a matter of just a few weeks, it took a little bit longer than we would have liked, but it took a few weeks to actually get the not only the app instrumented, but then collecting the data itself. We saw the rhythm and the cycle of how users across the user base, and we had a good user base at that time. It was like 1, 2, single digit million monthly active users. And one stat leapt out at me, which was the average session length of a user was only 24 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you see that, so people, what that means is a session length being is you open up the app, you're using the app, and then with iOS, you're pushing it into the background, or with Android, you're just no longer using the app. So the activity in the app is only 24 seconds. And so immediately, and gets to your point about, I wouldn't say data lies. What I would say is that data needs to be the inspiration for curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be
Oh,
looking at data to ask questions. Data doesn't always provide the answers. We need critical thinking. We need to be using our own reasoning. We need to be looking at this data and then asking the question, why? Okay. So data I see as one half of a conversation, right? There's the data part of it, but then as humans, as human beings, as product leaders, etc., we need to be using that data as the basis of a conversation. So what we what the data told us with this 24 seconds was, first of all, why is it only 24 seconds? What are the users actually doing? And you can immediately think about, okay, so we've got this person, they're in line at Starbucks, they're about to grab a coffee, and they're thinking, okay, have I got an email from a customer, from my boss, from a colleague? And they bring out the phone, they bring up Outlook, they scroll through, they see that they haven't got anything they need to take care of, and they put the phone back into their pocket. Or maybe there's just, yeah, I'll be right there, put my phone back into the pocket. So really what you have there is two insights. One is Outlook Mobile wasn't a writing tool. It's not a composition tool. It's a consumption tool. It's how do I get information easier. And then the other part is it's a tool that enables you to stay organized and focused on what you're doing, meaning that, okay, I haven't got Vikram hasn't sent me an email. I can relax and I can enjoy my cup of coffee. And so our the whole premise, or the way we were thinking about the product changed significantly. You were delighted by the product not only when you're using it, but when you're not using it, your life was improved.
hmm.
So, which is counterintuitive because a lot of
Yeah.
early product folks early in their career think that the value is only generated when you're using the product. But there's a tremendous amount of value that a product can give a user when they're not using it. And obviously, you can think about automations as the obvious one, right? I don't need to worry about this,
Yeah.
that email or that workflow or that trigger. It's going to happen at Monday morning at 7:30 a.m. because I want to engage with a European market and I want to be on their time zone as opposed to the Pacific time zone. And I don't want to get up at 6 a.m. to do that, right? So that's an
Yeah.
obvious one. But the other one, which especially if we're focusing so much on data, we lose sight of the concept of cognitive load,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're living in a very fractured um,
Yeah.
environment
Mm-hmm.
where just look at the number of messaging tools that we have or ways that we can
Yeah.
communicate with different people and how do we keep track of it, whether it's iMessage, WhatsApp, LinkedIn messages, email, Slack, Discord, all of these different platforms within which we can communicate or receive lots of information as well, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of value that you can provide to your user is by enabling them to be more in the present,
Hmm.
to be able to focus on what they're trying to accomplish, whether it is getting a job done using my phone or whether it's have a meaningful conversation with Vikram and I don't have to worry about anything else. So I think that's often lost when people tend to either focus in a very almost egotistical, um, self-centered way. It's my product. This is about the product, or alternatively, be overly dependent on data, to be
Yeah.
data driven as opposed to data informed. Data is really there to inform you. If it's not doing an automation, of course, and that's the beauty of the age that we're in. There's more and more and more that can be done automatically.
Yeah.
But to be as product leaders, to really take that data and, like I say, be curious about it and start a conversation.
Got it. James, so on that point of data leading to curiosity, or how you phrased it as in not being data rich, but being data informed, a lot of our listeners are also analysts, people who are doing analysis on a day basis, running queries and so on. I remember having a conversation with someone, and they seem to be scared about the fact that we don't have enough context.
Mm,
What I mean by context is, for example, whatever you just talked about, wherein it was not being used as a writing tool, that is based on a context. And it may be a business context, sometimes it may be just a context that you have because of experience and not necessarily related to business, but context matters. And this analyst in question was heavily worried that, okay, hey, as a data analyst, I know what to crunch, but I don't have that context. So my question to you is, how should someone at the grassroots level think about developing that context? Because I think the problem is true even for a lot of product managers. More than 75% of product managers also lack that context of making sense of stuff, which is why you have so few people who are really good at strategy. And
mm.
then the second lens to that, as a combined question, is, as someone who has been at, let's say, in the role of a head of product or a senior director, a director at even enterprises and relatively smaller companies, my question is, what do you think of whatever the analyst is doing? Of course, it's important, but when you are in that role, does it matter to you whether the analyst is able to do the analysis within minutes? Or are you really bothered about just the accuracy? Or is it like a sweet mix of both?
Okay, let's do the first part first around getting as an analyst,
Yeah.
ensuring that they have the right context, because I think the one piece where the analyst in particular can really help an executive that isn't as close to the data as that analyst by definition is the ability of storytelling,
Yeah.
which may seem counterintuitive because storytelling implies fiction. This is not a fiction story. This is a non-fiction story, right?
Yeah.
And so there's the ability for the analyst to take the data and then to be able to communicate why this insight, why this data, why this trend is important for the user, the product, the company, the business, etc. And so it's being able to take that data, abstract it to an appropriate level, and then be able to tell a compelling story.
Mm.
Because what an analyst is invariably looking to do, and I hear this from research teams all the time,
Yeah.
is they have the insights, they have the data, but it's the ability to affect change within the organization. That is
Mhm.
usually the hardest thing that researchers and analysts have to do, and it's probably the highest frustration that they have. Is like, well, I look at the data, I can see the data. Why are we going right when we should be going left? And that's where I come back to the ability for the analyst to be able to do that storytelling. And that could be within a presentation, it could be having a conversation, in the kitchen, at the water cooler, having lunch with somebody. It could be taking data and transferring that into charts, graphs, images, pictures, some other way for the audience writ large to actually absorb, understand the insights that the analyst has themselves already. So that's the first thing. So how does that analyst gain that context to be able to look at their own data and then be able to create that story, so to speak, that's going to
Yeah.
enable someone to get curious about the data to ultimately change the decision or create a strategy that's aligning with the business and with the data that the analyst is seeing. And that's
Yeah.
where it's an understanding that we're really talking about being a member of a team, right? It's not one person needs to be able to do everything. You need to be able to talk to the right people on your team to help you to fill the gaps of either the speciality, the experience, or the information that you're missing. And that's where the analyst and the product manager can really help each other. So the product manager's role is really to have a deep, visceral sense of the context of the user, right? So there are lots of people, and ideally everybody should be bringing the voice of the customer into internal conversations and debates and discussions around what we should be building, what sort of prioritization should we have. But it really is incumbent upon the product manager to be the source of truth when an engineer, a designer, a data analyst ask the question, why?
Yeah.
Right? The product manager needs to be able to answer that question. Why are we doing this instead of that? The product
Yeah.
manager needs to be able to answer that question or be able to go and get the answer to that question very, very quickly. And so the analyst talking to the product manager being able to talk about the context of the user, being able to talk about the context of the sales organization, the revenue team, the
Yeah.
marketing team, the business as a whole, the business model, right? They should be able to partner with that analyst to provide that context and it be a collaboration between the two to come up
Yeah.
with that compelling story that's going to help impact and affect the change in the strategy. And then the second part, can you just remind me of the second part of your question?
Yeah. I was asking whether an analyst who's sweating out at like running queries and so on, for someone who's sitting at the top in the form of a strategist,
Hmm.
what is really more important? Is it the pace at which you are getting answers? Because we talked about speed being very critical when it comes
Okay,
to
yeah,
deciding. Or is it about the accuracy, or is it just a sweet mix of both in a very objective way?
yeah. So, um, it all depends on the question and the problem that you're looking to solve.
Hmm.
Now, and it's also the balance between academic perfection and pragmatism, right? So as leaders, what you're looking to do is to provide clarity in situations of ambiguity, right? So people can continue to make progress even without all of the information or without everything being known. And then as product people, as engineers, rather than have an exhaustive solution, what we're looking to do is bound the problem. Try to find. We're looking to find aspects of the landscape, the environment, the data set, that we can kind of ignore that because we understand that we're narrowing down the scope. Scope is, I think, what I'm trying to get to here. Is understanding the
Yeah.
scope of the problem or the scope of the question to be answered. Um, what I've found with some analysts or researchers, they're looking to open up and try to know and understand everything, which is laudable. But there's a tipping point where an exhaustive aspect of research becomes impractical or non pragmatic. And by the time you get the right answer or have understood, right, the uh, the right path forward, because of the time it's taken to get that answer, the
Yeah.
premise upon which you're actually doing the research has changed itself. The
Changed.
environment has changed itself. And so it means that the answer that you're providing has been rendered moot, right?
Got
And
it.
so, what does that actually mean? It's like it's first of all setting expectations with the audience, whether it's the executive or whomever, that this is a first cut at the understanding of what the data actually means. And there are two aspects that we need to improve as we go forward and get a better answer. We need better
Got it.
data, or more data, or both, or we need to look at the data in a more in depth way. And so we should be approaching answering questions, we should be approaching the collection and the usage of data in the same way that we develop products, which is iteratively, right?
Yeah.
Have a first cut. It's like, okay, we need to go right instead of left. But is it right and a little bit straightforward? Is it right and hard right? We'll work that out as we go along. But at least we can start and continue to make progress. That's absolutely key. But it kind of ties back to the storytelling piece as you're telling the executive, as you're telling the audience that this is how what we understand of the data. It's what does that data actually mean, and what are the boundaries of our understanding, and how are you going to fill in those gaps over time,
Yeah.
and when you're going to fill in those gaps over time. So again, you can keep making progress as you go.
Yeah.
um, Hopefully, yeah, that answers your question.
Yeah. James, I wish we could talk forever. And every time you pause, I'm excited because you're like thinking about something very deep and you come back with a statement which just hits me very hard. Uh, I
Oh,
have
thank you.
one closing question for you. Any learning you have had that you would like to share with our audience?
um, I constantly make mistakes, so I've learned a lot over the years. um, the number one is, I think, given your audience, which are obviously analysts and people that are very data centric, it is it is look at the qualitative side, not just
Yeah,
the quantitative side. Understand, don't be don't be data driven, be data informed.
got it.
And as you're looking at the data, ask why. What does the data mean? I think that's the number one part of it. And make sure that you're partnering very closely with the rest of the people in your team, and seeing how you can help them. Right? How can you help them solve their problem? How can you help them answer their questions? Data is a means to an end. It's not the end itself.
Got it. And I always save this for the last minute. If someone is starting out today and there's everything that's happening in the world, what do you think they should focus on? As in, not in terms of quality, is there a domain in terms of product or data that you think is still having a large unmet need?
The beautiful thing about this age of artificial intelligence is there's not a single aspect of almost human experience that is not going to radically change. So
Yeah,
we it's rife with opportunity.
first
And
principles.
so what I would encourage people to focus on is the problem that's going to be solved. Right? Make
Got it.
sure focus on the problem, not the solution. Focus on the problem.
James, this was an absolute pleasure having you. If someone in the audience wants to reach out to you, where should they hit you up? I'll add the
Best
details in the description.
best place is LinkedIn. Yeah, that's the easiest thing.
Perfect. James, thank you so much for taking the time out. It was an absolute pleasure. And
Likewise.
folks, hope you enjoy the show.
Thank you very much, Vikram. Absolute pleasure myself. Really appreciate
Thanks,
it.
James. Bye bye.